This conference will now be recorded.
All right, great. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining from your respective homes, wherever you are. I'm Katie Delangel. For those that don't know me, I'm a product content strategist at Shopify. Of course, there we go. Sorry. So just some quick background on me. I'm a former content marketer. I was in the agency scene for a long time before I joined the product world. And when I did shift over to the product side, I was a content strategist as well as a content marketer and kind of just straddling the two for a while. But I've had a long time interest in user experience design, from my very first internship at a dental implants company to organizing an international UX conference out of Portland, Oregon. I've just always had a deep interest in the broader user journey and building out that experience. And what drew me to product content strategy eventually is this desire to stop talking about the thing that we were building and really just start building the thing. And so I'm lucky enough to be working at Shopify these days as a product content strategist, as I mentioned. I'm building the Shopify email app, which actually just launched internationally yesterday. So pretty exciting days over there. And so today I want to walk you through a couple quick things. At a very high level, Yanis was mentioning before this call that, content strategy is a pretty loaded term these days. It comes with a lot of baggage. And so I just want to give a quick overview of my perspective on content strategy and where we're at today, and then talk about how it intersects with product strategy and how it can really amplify and expedite the efficiency behind your product strategy. And then I'm going to share a couple tools from the Content Strategist Toolkit that you can hopefully bring back to your teams. So this is a pretty familiar definition, I think, to most content strategists out there. Christina Halverson coined this definition. And when we're talking about content strategy, we're thinking about creating, delivering, and governing the content behind our site or our product experience, whatever that may be. I really appreciate the simplified version of the definition, though, from Elizabeth McGuane, one of my colleagues at Shopify. She boils it down to content strategy is simply just content planning. And when we're considering what we're exactly planning for, excuse me, I think about content as really just information. Whether you're trying to sell someone something through content marketing or trying to build awareness for your brand or trying to fuel a product experience, it's all fueled by content, and content is information. And experiences without that information are pretty useless. If you look at this pretty popular food delivery app called DoorDash, this is a picture from Writing is Designing by Andy Walfel and Michael Metz. Recently came out, I believe, at the beginning of this year. This screenshot, I think, is a perfect illustration of how an experience pretty much falls apart when you don't have the information to stitch it together. Design is essentially a shell for that information, and you need that content to make your experience richer and more valuable for the user to accomplish whatever it is they need to accomplish. And when I think about content strategy within user experience design, this is an illustration that I came up with myself. There's a lot of other disciplines under UX design, of course, front-end development, front-end design. I haven't included in there, but these are a couple other disciplines that often interact with content strategy. You're working with UX research to gain the context and data points you need to create that user experience. And ultimately, your visual designer or your product designer is behind building the experience out. Some of the things that tend to fall under the content strategist purview would be information architecture, of course. How do you structure that content and that experience? And then what are the interactions behind the design that help surface that information? And depending where you are at as a content strategist, if you're in the product realm, that perspective kind of shifts a little bit. So you're not really focusing on copywriting necessarily, you're focusing on UX writing and creating content for the interface, which is meant to really drive the experience forward through the product. And so my perspective comes from this realm. And so now thinking about where content strategy intersects with product strategy. When I think of a product manager, these are just a couple of the really high level goals I think most are facing. They're working on aligning their teams, developing a strategy for their product line, establishing and executing a roadmap towards success, and figuring out how they can optimize and iterate on those product ideas. And really the foundation behind any good product line is a clearly defined concept. It's going to be the first step to aligning your team and making sure that you can build a strategy on top of that concept, and then delivering a product that would make sense within a system or platform that you're within. And concepts and products, they're such nebulous ideas, but at the core of any product, you should have that concept clarity to develop a good design. And so if your team doesn't understand or doesn't align on what that concept really is that's driving your product forward, you can't really build features and a roadmap around it. You can't build these elements that help people understand your product and use it. And so looking at the content strategy process, this is from Karen McRae a few years back, but I think it's still pretty relevant at a very high level. This process pretty directly aligns with what you're doing as a product manager. You have this bucket of alignment and trying to figure out, consider and explore, the need for information to drive your experience. When it comes to strategizing, you're evaluating and exploring all the different dependencies of content and information throughout your experience and the ecosystem that it will exist in. And when it comes time to create and execute on your content strategy, you're figuring out what are the frameworks that we need to deliver that information and how do we stitch that together and make it scalable. And then lastly, how do we maintain that content in that product or in that ecosystem over time? How can we create a measurement framework or different frameworks to help our team succeed and help our content strategy scale? And so taking it back to the product manager side of things and looking at it through the lens of a content strategist, when it comes to alignment, you really want to help your team really hone in on what that concept is and make sure they're crystal clear about what they're building and what that solution is about. And understanding concepts is really all about communicating about the problem that you want to solve and developing a common language around it. Secondarily, you're trying to strategize a roadmap for your product, which comes down to scope and prioritization of the features that should be behind that solution. And to do that, you really need to really dive deep into the context around that solution and that product area. And that's something that your product content strategist is going to be invaluable at because they're really good at seeing, the connections between different pieces of information across an organization or across a platform. And they're great for ensuring that you don't overlook any edge cases. In the execution bucket, you're thinking about how do we actually implement this solution? And as I mentioned, the content strategist is really good at kind of knowing where those dependencies lie and where those connections happen. So knowing what information is needed is your first step to creating a structure for it to be delivered for your end users. And then lastly, how do we continue to optimize on our product and how do we drive success for it over time? And your content strategist is usually going to have some great tools to help you test, iterate, and track the success of your product and your content over time. And so the content strategist toolkit is often pretty robust. This is a small sampling of some of the tools that we're often working with. And I've neatly packaged them into each of these 4 stages, but in reality, there's a handful of things that really overlap and that extend throughout the content experience and your product experience. But I want to look at a few of these tools today and just share with you my perspective on how they can be super useful for a product manager or just a product team at large. So some of the tools I want to share today, none of these are groundbreaking. Hopefully some of them are familiar to some of you, but I want to share specifically how they can build efficiency within your teams and how they can help you scale over time. So BrandSort is a card sorting tool. It helps brands understand what their message architecture is meant to be. What are the characteristics that their experience should really embody? And it can really help your team align not only around message, even though the word message is intrinsic in the in the deliverable, but it helps your team align around features, your roadmap, UI elements and calls to action throughout the UI, and a lot more throughout your product experience. So I really want to underscore that this is not just a copywriting tool, it's a design tool, and it's a product design tool. So when it comes to seeing message architecture in product, I took this example from two apps that I have that are both loosely horoscope related type apps. On the left, you have the pattern, and on the right, you have CoStar. And if I were to imagine what their message architecture looks like, what are the core characteristics that they want people to understand about their app? The pattern, I would say, is more accessible, more personal, and more actionable. You'll see things like a friends feed at the bottom of the pattern. You also notice some softer corners, some bolder fonts. Very familiar, I think, to anyone who uses Facebook. I think it's pretty clear they're trying to draw the connection between, your personal pattern and then your social network and your friends. And I think it makes the user feel comfortable right off the bat. I mean, my big face is right there. I think it's meant to put the user at the core of the experience. Whereas something like CoStar, I think their message architecture would look a little bit different. You can tell that they've really prioritized elements of astrology, charts, and a little bit more technical language and nomenclature throughout their navigation. And I think it's a bit more spiritual, and it's meant to be more thought-provoking, a little less tangible in terms of timing and action and things that are peppered throughout the interface. I don't think it's not necessarily meant to drive action as much as the pattern. The next tool I want to share for aligning your teams would be a voice and tone guideline. And again, hopefully this is familiar to everyone. Hopefully your brand has this at a high level. But within product management, I think having a unique voice and tone guideline can be really useful to help empower your team and understand where that tone might be nuanced throughout your experience. And this should help empower your team to make smaller decisions and make them faster. And again, this is not just a tool for copywriting either. Let's take this example straight from Shopify. Even without reading any of this content, you can understand that there's a big difference between what you're trying to get the user to do with this information. The yellow banner is not dismissible, and it's a little more urgent and alarming. The icon is an exclamation point as opposed to just an I for information. And the blue is a little more calming and subdued. It allows the user to dismiss it and learn more if they want to, but it's not necessarily inciting any immediate action. The next tool is, again, a very common one. Everyone's probably going to encounter a competitive analysis at some stage in their product strategy. But what I want to say here, I think it's very important when you're looking at your competitive landscape to look at how other competitors are approaching their solutions and what language patterns are popping up. And I think it's important to share this with your team so that they gain appreciation for the ecosystem that they're building the product within. And it also helps them come up with decisions on their own a little faster too. As you move into the strategy bucket and even into execution, mapping out user journeys is a little bit more useful, I would say, than just simply mapping out user flows. I think it's really worth distinguishing the difference between the two. When you're thinking about user paths, rather, you're thinking about specific interactions that your user might be taking throughout your app or your product. But when you think about the full journey, you're thinking beyond just what the happy path is, and you're thinking about the small nuances and areas that information can help drive the user forward wherever they may be within that journey. So you get a lot more opportunity to examine potential errors or opportunities to enrich the experience with more information. For example, this is straight from the Shopify email app. We encountered the opportunity to help users understand the value of having their store address in their email footer. And we really grappled with whether or not this feature should be an option or something that's required of the user or something that is gently suggested. And so on the left, we have a screenshot where, we were exploring some options, and we had a lot of discussion around whether or not it should be an error message if the user really needed to take that action, or simply a tooltip might be enough. It also helped us identify where we might need help center content and extra documentation for users to make up their own mind around this bit of information and this interaction. The next stage, when you move into execution and building your product, having a content inventory to track and document all of the different bits of content and the elements throughout your interface can be instrumental in implementing all of those decisions, but it also helps you iterate down the line. So this is just an example kind of template of a content inventory that I used. In the first row, you can see that I pretty granularly outlined every single potential interaction that a user might have within our tool. The second stage is, the second column, excuse me, is the stage at which it was within product build. I also noted whether or not it needed a message in the interface. As I mentioned in the last example, sometimes you don't really need a message in the interface. Sometimes you really just need to reconsider how the page is architectured or reconsider the options that are presented to the user. I also noted where and how that information should be presented. So that's what you see in column E, V1 response. And so I got pretty detailed there to help our engineers really understand what we were trying to create with this part of our platform. And then I even got so far as granularly typing out all of the content that was happening in all of these UI messages. This was useful as an inventory, but also as an audit tool. And again, when it came time to iterate on our product down the line, when we got more resources and more time, this was a great tool to help us do that as well. Another thing that hopefully is familiar to most, having a style guide or a glossary of all the different content elements within your product can be a great source of truth for the entire team, not just whoever's doing the actual copywriting, but the people implementing the solution as well. And hopefully some of these decisions start to get ingrained more in the team, and it helps them make decisions even faster. The last tool I want to share is a content testing plan, which can help you iterate on your product over time. Optimal Workshop offers a really great tool called TreeJack that helps you do some tree testing, which can really help you explore the IA of your tool or your site. And this is great even at the beginning of a product or a project launch, when you're trying to understand the mental model of your users and how they might naturally prioritize action and information. But it's also great later on in the project when you're ready to do some testing and you maybe don't have as many design resources on hand. And so whether you have a product content strategist on your team or not, these are just some really great questions to ask yourself at each stage of your project. When it comes to alignment, it's time to really think about what else we need to know about where our product is going to exist, either within the platform or the broader ecosystem, and what information needs to exist to drive the experience forward for that product. When you're thinking about the strategy, how do we prioritize the features and elements and different information throughout our experience? And where do we put that? And that's really what's going to help you take your concept to reality. When you're in the execution stage, thinking about the frameworks to scale that can help you implement some of those calls to action, labels, and all of the bits of microcopy and content throughout your experience. Where does that information live? Creating a framework can really help you as you scale. And then lastly, where are we concerned that the user experience might fall apart? Maybe we can document that in an inventory and find ways to audit it down the line and find ways to iterate as we grow. And that is all I've got today. I'm open to any questions if you want to throw them my way.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you. That was really good. Thank you for sharing the examples, the different stages. We do have the first question already. So let's start with Hilary Marsh. Perhaps you already know each other, but Hillary, you asked how many products do you tend to work on at a time?
So at Shopify, I have been extraordinarily lucky. I joined at the very beginning of the Shopify email project, really, and since day one, I've only been on that one project. Within Shopify, for the most part, we have one content strategist, one project per content strategist, ideally. A couple people do straddle, sometimes two or three, though, depending on where there's product overlap and where things might intersect.
Do you talk to the other content strategists who are working on the other projects so that there's like organization-wide consistency?
All the time. Actually, I get kind of jealous comments sometimes from some of my teammates who are not content strategists, because the content strategists within Shopify are so tightly knit and we're constantly collaborating. We have a handful of stand-ups, excuse me, outside of just immediate project collaboration that let us kind of see into each other's projects, even if we're not directly collaborating. We do a weekly content crit session with 3 or 4 of our peers, whether they're within our product line or not. And it gives us a good opportunity to just share our work and help each other work through different problems. And it's really interesting to see where there's overlap. As I mentioned, I'm on Shopify email, and I have been in content crit groups with people on, like, let's say the money and payments side of things. And there's very little in common with the actual problems that we're solving, or the solutions we're building, sorry, but the problems we're solving are kind of similar. And I think it helps us create that consistency in places that you would never expect. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
All right, Katie. So next one is from Paris or thereabouts. Nicholas from Orange asks how many people work in the product team and on the content strategy part. So if you could perhaps elaborate a little bit on the size of the team.
Sure. So if I remember correctly, I believe the product side is it's got to be around 450 at this point. I might be wrong. I do know the content strategy team is around 56 or 57.
Very impressive. So if anybody has additional questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Can you elaborate a little on the dynamics between content strategists and product managers? Is Helle from also here in Denmark asking?
Yeah, of course. So I'm pretty tight with, we have 2 product managers right now. They are so talented, I guess, at juggling so many things, and especially in a product like Shopify email, which we launched it in just over a year. And for them, what they need to do is really look at our product from a very high level. And when I asked them what they saw the biggest value of content strategy as, they both mentioned they really appreciate how deep I can go into the details and how good I am at digging up context. Because with something like email, for example, they know that we need to check certain boxes and deliver certain features, but understanding where we intersect with different parts of the Shopify product is something that wasn't necessarily on their plate. And so they really rely pretty heavily on me or other content strategists to dig into those details and unpack them and figure out what other parts of the platform do we need to collaborate with. Where does our engineering team need to touch base with their engineering team? Yeah, we collaborate all the time, and yeah, I think it frees them up a lot to focus on more of the high level, big picture stuff.
Great. So before I pass you on to the next one, just want to check, Helle, was that the answer you were looking for?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very interesting.
Excellent. And then jumping to London or thereabouts, Gavin, do you want to just ask?
Hey, Jonas. Thanks, Katie. That was really, really interesting. I was just wondering if many of your content strategists actually write copy as well, or is that a separate role, the copywriter?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I actually think that is one of the bigger misconceptions for new hires at Shopify that are not content strategists. Often assume that content strategists are only copywriters. And so yes, we do write copy for the interface, but we also, obviously do so much more. It's a pretty small part of my role at this point. It's, I would say, 20%, maybe 30%. There's a lot more kind of systems thinking and strategy work that goes on. I think it also depends on where your product is at. With a brand new product, you're doing a lot more of the strategy work and a little bit less of the copywriting and UI writing. But yeah, it's still a core part of it. We do have a lot of content strategists across the company that take shape in different ways. So we have some people that are dedicated to writing the help documentation. We have other people that are dedicated to writing the product marketing copy and things like that. So I'm lucky enough to be able to work with people across different teams that handle that for us. So it lets me really just focus on the actual product design element.
Nice, thank you. You answered a few questions there, actually.
Very good. So coming up on the last 2 minutes, any closing questions? We still have time for at least one more, perhaps one question and then 2 more answers, but let's see. Alternatively, I can hand it over to you, Katie, perhaps a closing comment, reflection on your side. I think there's something here around content strategy, meeting product strategy that's to me kind of seems like unexplored territory. Certainly not something that's received a lot of attention in the product management groups that we've had during the last couple of years. Any insights from your side on why that might be?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to a point that I made in the talk abstract, I guess, that I don't think I really dug into, which is content can often be like an afterthought or a burden
Yes.
to some products and projects, whether that's a website or a product. And I think that is usually because whoever is managing the project is, as I mentioned, really just forced to handle so much and at such a high level that there really isn't anyone that's handling like the nitty-gritty details and going that deep into the context. And so content strategy is really like an untapped source, I think, for some product companies that haven't come to understand its role in product design and in UX design. And it's something that I'm willing to keep crusading for. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. Very, very good. That's really interesting. I think that's all we have for now in terms of the time, but Martin Kotz from Switzerland also suggested here, perhaps for a future call, the crossover between innovation and content strategist. Perhaps that's something that can leave us all thinking, and then we'll soon meet again. Next week, we have another call and many more planned for May. But in closing, I just want to say thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
All right. All right. Have a great day,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.